Hello and welcome to Authors Die Twice, a podcast on video games and aesthetic theory hosted by two living failures. In this episode, we conclude our conversation about Elden Ring and Shadow of the Erdtree, at least for now, by discussing our experience engaging with Souls multiplayer systems for the first time. We recount our experience co-oping the DLC's final boss and talk more broadly about how engaging with multiplayer transforms the experience of playing a Souls game. We hope you enjoy listening.
So I thought we could start by saying a bit about that Consort Radahn fight we did together, the final boss of the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC.
Yep.
Since it's been a couple of weeks now, it might be helpful to just like go back and narrate what the process was or what the experience was like. I think I clocked it at around 10, no, I think around 7 hours over 3 sessions, at least according to my logged videos on Twitch. I think it was like a 2 hour session, a 3 hour session, and then a 2 hour session. Uh, so it took us quite a while. I wish we had counted the number of attempts. It was a lot, probably like 50, maybe 60. I don't know. Do you remember anything about how the winning run unfolded?
Yeah, I remember that it was one of those real, I don't know, real kind of impossible moments, right? Like you didn't, you, th it was one of, so I mean, I just remember the ending is kind of iconic, right? Where you think we're just pelting him with those, throwing knife things or whatever. And then you thought you got him because his health bar was invisible. And then
Yes, yeah, yeah.
I got the final blow. You had just died. It was one of those kind of crazy moments like that.
Yeah, I'm reconstructing it now. I'm remembering. I think the run started off like kind of so I everything is filtered. Then this is one of the quirks of doing this online thing, and then recording it in in on Twitch or whatever. But
Yeah.
I remember I just sort of see each run only through my perspective. So I remember that I think I took a lot of hits early in the first phase and thought that it was kind of a crap run.
Yeah.
Um, and then we just sort of, I think we got lucky. Like he might have gone for the smooch a bunch of times, which now I'm remembering that was the theme of our our sessions against him was strategizing around his loving disposition,
Yeah.
kisses that he's always trying to give the player. But I think he went for like a couple really clutch ones that allowed you to rot him, and then I used up all my health and all my flasks, and I was down to like half health, and he still had a good chunk left, and so I just started pelting him with the kukris, the bleed knives.
Yep.
Never really having used those before in the game. Like I knew they caused bleed, and we were trying to bleed him out, so I thought, let me just try these guys, and I hit him with like three of them, and he had a huge bleed, blood loss, right as he was about to kill me. I had no health left. Um, and then yeah, and then I started celebrating or something, right? We did record this. I should watch the video after just
Yeah,
to
yeah, I wish I watched it as well, but yeah,
yeah,
you said he's dead, and I like interpreted that correctly as meaning he's almost dead, right? Because he was like, it's like in I don't know, Halo or something. If you go, he's one shot or whatever,
right.
like his shield's down, like somebody just hit him, and that's what it was. Like he was basically there, but he wasn't dead, right? If I kind of dropped the ball, I would have gotten killed.
Yeah.
Uh,
His health was so low that it wasn't appearing. It was basically like
yeah,
invisible in the health bar. It's Souls,
yeah,
they
yeah,
do have that quirk where sometimes you can get an enemy, a boss so low that there's just such a tiny sliver that you can't even tell because of the design, the
yeah.
border of the health bar itself.
Mhm.
Um, but it is coming back to me, like how catastrophic would it have been if you had died? Like if you had interpreted my message as I meant it, and then you had like given up or done an emote or something, and then got smashed. Because yeah, that was amazing. I mean, you really closed the deal. Like you killed him almost immediately after I said he's dead. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, and I
did you
think
hit the
and I
lightning?
think you didn't realize until you watched it back that because I remember we were texting about it afterwards. You went and saved the clip and re didn't realize, I think, until you watched it back, from what I remember, that that was when he died. Uh,
Exactly. Like as I was, yeah, and in the clip you can see I'm already dying and my screen is fading out, but you can see then you hit him with something, I think with a lightning strike or
yeah,
something,
yeah,
and he
so
actually. disintegrates and we get the God slain uh, message right as my feed stops because I get booted out of your world.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, so I mean that's kind of interesting. So we didn't talk about this at all before, but I think first of all, when I mean, because one thing I do want to talk about is, co-op, not just as co-op, but also as like kind of a little community of reading, maybe we could say, if we want to put it that way. Because if we're talking about, thinking through these games in kind of a critical way or whatever, we're not just working together to play the games, we're also communicating and building some kind of little, relationship or community around these games. And in the instances that we play together like that, not only are we are we reading and misreading in our own ways, we're reading and misreading kind of across, across our chat as we're going through and playing, right? Uh,
Yeah.
so there's even maybe a higher level of error or margin of error. But it makes me think. So this is something that I know you've talked about recently about how we talk through. I mean, so we just actually nicely did the opposite of what I'm going to say, which is we just talked about one specific instance of playing through this boss fight. The winning one, right? But when we tend to critically write about literature, music, games, film, anything, right? There's this tendency that we have to um, ascribe a sort of like ascribe or maybe even prescribe like a feeling, an effect, an interpretation onto whoever, whether it's the viewer, the reader, the player, whoever's
Mhm.
encountering the work, right? So we say, this, whether we say you or not, or whether we just say this part means blank, right? I mean, every kind of critical lens does this. Marxist criticism, psychoanalytic criticism, um, most of them will say, well, oh, this part is meant to be interpreted as, you know, X, right? There's always some kind of thing that we kind of ascribe to whoever the imagined audience is of this work
Mhm.
of art. And so I think I don't know, I feel like if I'm trying to zoom out a little and step back and think about what it was like playing together, I think that we maybe like didn't have, I don't know, I don't feel like I felt that as much, or I don't feel as much of that tendency, like it's almost like in a way it's almost more difficult to talk about playing co-op, in other words, because I
Yeah.
feel like we were chatting the whole time. I mean, there's that, there's the phenomenological fact that we were making jokes the whole time. We were, saying like a bunch of dumb stuff. Um, and so our experience certainly was, immersive in a different way, but I think it also yeah, I think there was maybe a little bit less of that kind of um, that kind of vision into the work, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. Like I've thought about this too. I mean, I exclusively write about and think critically about or aesthetically, I guess is the word, about single player games. And partly it's because even though the game is made by a team, there's still that sort of uh um there's a delimited nature to the experience, and that it's just me who's experiencing it. And then whether I want to sort of narrate or recount my own experience or sort of abstract it into a general experience that a reader or a player might have, which, again, is a sort of common critical convention. You have your own experience, and then as you describe it, you write it as a sort of impersonal, more general experience. When you add another player in there, that does totally muddy the waters. Like it becomes harder in a way to talk about it as art. Not that it's any less of a work of art, but
Yeah, yeah.
it just becomes much more complicated, especially for people like us, I would think, who are used to writing about texts. Maybe if you're used to writing about experiential theater, then you have more of a vocabulary, or dance, more of a vocabulary for talking about your own participation and participation with the community or with multiple people. I'm thinking now of like TJ Clark, the art critic TJ Clark has this There's this amazing chapter on Picasso. This is a tangent, but there's a chapter on Picasso and Braque in his book on modernism, Farewell to an Idea. And the chapter has a great title. It's called Cubism and Collectivity. And his ultimate sort of thesis, as I remember it, it could be totally misquoting or misremembering, but I think it's something like, in the end, for Cubism, like there was a community, but it was a community of two, and that was sufficient. But like the minute that dissolved, Cubism did change. So the thinking of that not as a partnership or as a relation of like, action and reaction, but actually as a kind of minimal community between these two artists is interesting. So maybe two people can, that's all to say, maybe two people can be a community. But yeah, it becomes much harder for me to get my head around how aesthetic experience is functioning because it's like there's just a whole new vector there, right? It's like it's my relationship to the person I'm co-oping with, but then each of us have our own relationship to the game, and then each of us have our own relationship to the fact that the game is occasioning this cooperation or cooperative experience. You know what I mean? That's like seems like somewhat separate from from like the kind of strict relationship between one player and another. It's like triangulated with the work too. You have to take that into account. Um, and it does leave me a little bit like puzzled or at loss as to what to say, about form, or about again about like aesthetic experience. I'm now remembering that one of my favorite games of all time, like I think just simply one of the greatest games ever made. I think if you were ranking games in some sort of neutral sense or like without, if at least for me, if I took away any sort of personal tilt, right, which tends toward games that occasion wonder, sort of more quiet, atmospheric, almost literary experiences like what you have in FromSoft. I would say like easily one of the top 10 best games I've ever played is NBA 2K12. Specifically that year's edition of the 2K series because it just hit the sweet spot of simulation and fun. Like the balance is just perfect. I can talk more about that on a different episode. I don't want to get sidetracked, but anyway, I would never write about 2K12, the NBA 2K12, just because I think it would just be too difficult. And I mainly played it in multiplayer with my brother. Um, so I just don't, I'm still, I feel like we're both sort of finding our way. I don't want to speak for you, but at least I'm still finding my way in how to like deal with games aesthetically. And I think the multiplayer experience is one where I've barely scratched the surface and I really don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, this is bringing up actually a few things, and I think, tangents are good because this is what's, helping us think it through a little bit. So this is not at all what I expected to talk about when talking about this game, but I'm like, revisiting both the book and the film, Remains of the Day, and there's this moment where Stevens, the kind of the main character, the butler, is in his office reading, and Miss Kenton comes in and is kind of like demanding to know what he's reading. And she keeps saying, like, is it racy? What are you reading? Why are you being shy with your book? And she eventually, like, kind of gets up in his face and grabs the book and looks at it, and it's just some sentimental romance, right? Like she thinks it's like some pornographic
Right.
book, but it, in a way that's like even more personal, like more vulnerable that he's reading this kind of sentimental thing. Like if he was
Yeah.
reading pornography, it would be like fine, but it's like actually like it's actually like so much more meaningful for him to be reading this like sentimental thing because there's also this, I guess maybe this tension that develops between them and so on. So not to get too much in the plot of it, but I mean, one thing I guess is that aesthetic experience and reading is, I was after revisiting that scene, I was thinking like, wow, like if we could only read out loud and not just, in our heads or, not just looking at a book, but we actually had to say everything we were reading, we'd probably read different books, right? Like if I had to like always net like say out loud what I was reading around other people, there's certainly certain things that I would be a little, more hesitant to be reading, right? Same thing with music. If I could only listen to music on full blast, not with headphones ever, right? Like there are certain instances where I would probably have to choose something different. And so there's like a vulnerability, right, to any kind of artistic or aesthetic encounter. And I think maybe that's partly like what what we're seeing break down a little bit when we play co-op, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah. The book thing too just reminded me of this, just quickly another tangent, which is just an example of precisely this. And that a few months ago, I won't say what the book is. I know this is sort of bad podcast content, but I got interested in this book that I was really embarrassed to be reading. So I was going to order it on order it to my to our apartment because even then like I was too embarrassed to like go to a store and buy it. So I was like, well, I could just order it to our place and read it that way. But then I was embarrassed that Emily would see it. So I bought it on Kindle. And then I read it on my laptop and just tried to play it off like I was like, whatever, just like doing stuff on my laptop. And then it was so good that then I just ended up telling everybody about it anyway. Like I told Emily about it and then I told friends about it and her friends. And I was like, this book actually is amazing, even though I felt like such a weirdo buying it. So yeah, I mean, it's totally true. I think we would read differently or potentially could read differently. I mean, this also feels like a deeply like 18th or like 19th century problem. It's like or
yeah,
question, like a rise of the novel question, about
sure. Yeah.
what's suitable, what kind of fiction or even literature is appropriate uh, for by whatever metric you want to use, historical metric. But yeah, I mean, so are you saying that the vulnerability of the sort of private intense experience is lessened in co-op, even though in co-op you are engaging with like another person and by a function of Elden Ring's design and potentially other people too. Like we were invaded a few times waiting on those stairs to enter the Divine Gate. Right, the Divine Gate Starefront site of grace. I think a couple times we had somebody roll up and try to kill us.
Yeah.
So we're technically more vulnerable in that we can be invaded and are interacting with real people and getting teabagged or whatever if if the mood strikes them,
Yeah.
as did happen to me.
Yes.
Uh, but that there's less in terms of like sort of aesthetic openness or aesthetic vulnerability, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, so the other, I mean, we also have to I don't know that that's exactly what I think because I think maybe, right? Like I think just by the nature of playing a game, I mean, we weren't playing a romantic erotic game. We were
But
playing
we were.
I mean, yeah, I guess yeah.
We have to talk about that too, about
I guess
necrophiliac Radahn.
yeah, that is true. Yeah, that is true. But I mean, so with a game like this, it's more I mean, I think about it in these terms. I don't know that they're always helpful, I guess, but like a novel is more or less one track, right? You read it linearly. Sure, you stop and put it down or get lost in thought or lose your place or read the same sentence over and over again if you're distracted. But you kind of go, you know, uh, from the beginning to the end. And at the same time, as we kind of just mentioned, there's almost there's still almost like a kind of I think the question of judgment we could talk about, but there's almost like a question of judgment to even be reading something in the first place, right? Like this is something that I think about often, which is, whether it's music, again, music, art, whatever kind of medium it is, whether it's a novel or an album, you can get looks for for engaging with it, right?
Right.
I've had the experience of whether it's reading something in public or you have your Spotify up or whatever and someone's like, "Oh, why were you listening to?" I think recently my friend and I were listening to Whitney or no, sorry, not Whitney, Janet Jackson's discography.
Nice.
And and someone said, what the hell are you doing listening to Janet Jackson's entire, that album by Janet? You weren't just listening to like the hits, you were listening to this like kind of more obscure album or whatever, right? Um, so there is like a culpability. I mean, that's like maybe a more social thing. I guess to maybe get back to your question and kind of think about how the experience is transformed when playing together. I do think like yeah, I mean, I think it really transforms. Like it does lose something of its intensity in a certain way, I think. Uh, and
I agree.
I
Yeah.
think I think it's like partly me as a player, like phenomenologically, experientially, just like, now we are talking, now we are in communication about this. It's no longer Um, I do have problems with thinking about, the way that we think about immersiveness sometimes, but it does feel in a certain way like less immersive, right? Um,
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's this whole other, level of interaction that is totally transcends the fictional or the diegetic world, or just the experience being rendered on screen that is totally, yeah, it's just basically a phone conversation that is imminent to the game because the game allows for it. Or
yeah,
the system used. I mean, I actually don't think I think the voice chat is happening through the party function on PlayStation rather than Elden Ring. I think Elden Ring doesn't allow for voice chat, which is also interesting. Um,
yeah, yeah,
because maybe we were playing on. I think that if you're playing online but having to communicate through gestures and don't have this extra level of engagement where you're just talking to someone and strategizing verbally, um, that could remain immersive in the way that we've been talking about. And actually it's one of the quirks of another quirk of the whole series is that there's various each one I think has some kind of diegetic reason for why there are other players in your game, so that ostensibly the co-oping is happening in universe, entirely in universe, as well as the invasions. None of that is like pure multiplayer functionality. It's actually part of the nature of the lands between or whatever that you can have these phantoms coming in and out.
right. Yeah. And yet, obviously, like that still depends materially on your purchase of a PlayStation subscription or whatever, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so the illusion is never really complete in that way.
Right, and I played easily 1,000 hours of this series.
Yeah,
Probably 1,500 hours at this point, if you consider every, Demon Souls through the Dark Souls games, Bloodborne, not even counting Sekiro, or Armored Core, which I just finished, and Elden Ring.
yeah,
And it wasn't until like, last month that I bought a PlayStation subscription and we actually played online, you know. Um, and that is like, yeah, it's interesting to have that many hours banked in a series where a core component you just simply never engage with at all. Um, so that's something we could talk about too. I do feel like there's more, and I don't want to cut you off because I feel like you were mid-thought too. Did you have something else another point you were about to hit?
no, I think we can come back to it. I'll just echo you too and say that I've played these games also probably for almost as long, if not as long, as many hours. I mean, from Dark Souls to up to Elden Ring, like just again and again, some of these games I've probably played through 4 or 5 times,
Yeah.
and like, other than like a few back in the day, I think when I was playing like Dark Souls on Xbox, maybe I got invaded a few times or whatever, but I never kind of intentionally. I mean, I think like people go on and play multiplayer, right? Like people go on and specifically attempt to do multiplayer shenanigans, which was never something that I was really doing, right? And so that's I don't know, maybe that's another thing to maybe table for now and think about because I do think um it doesn't necessarily make me want to just go like indiscriminately play multiplayer, right? Like we
Yeah.
partied up and we played and and that was its own kind of experience, right? But I
Yeah.
don't think I would necessarily uh go in and just try to I don't know. I guess I'll just say too that multiplayer can be kind of frustrating, right? Because there are all these limitations on it, but maybe
Right.
that's just kind of a side thought.
Should we say a little bit about the Valentine's Day special nature of this battle that we alluded to? Mainly just to give a breakdown or a recap as becomes continually fresher in my mind. Like, I think we started with our regular builds, right? We were both running faith builds.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I had a lightweight armor build based around lightning, really powerful build, like destroys PvE, like really fast spell casting, strong spell casting, and using some melee as well. But that was just getting wrecked, partly because Radahn is strong against Holy, at least in the second phase. We were doing horrible damage with our melee weapon. So I think we eventually switched to a strategy of bleed, which is I think in the Souls community or Elden Ring community is seen as a bit of a cop out. Maybe it was, although we only bled him twice. Like it was we had to fight like hell and get lucky to get a second bleed or to get a single bleed in a second phase. So bleed was really a technique to get through the first phase.
Yeah.
It did make it way more manageable though, for sure. But then the funny thing was that we sort of realized, as I sort of mentioned before, like that he has this move where he'll in the second phase where he'll grab you and Mikola, who is riding on top of Radahn, the demigod, who you've been chasing throughout the DLC, will I think he's technically whispering something in your ear. You get grabbed by this unique attack. It has annoying tracking, but also it has a huge opening. And if he grabs you the first time, it has no effect other than a little rune appearing above your head. And then if he grabs you two or three times, I forget which number it is, you will get mind controlled, or basically he breaks your will and you submit entirely to Mikola, and the match just ends. You get a fail state, a totally unique fail state as far as this game goes. Um, so it looked like he was giving us a little peck on the cheek, right? As he whispers in your ear. And then we figured out that the best strategy for this phase was for me to let myself get grabbed because
Mhm.
I was the cooperator. So it didn't really matter. If I died, it wasn't the end of the world. And as I was grabbed, you would use the butterfly spell.
Yeah.
Right? So, and it was like a pink Aeonia or pink rot spell. Um, so we would have our sort of battle with this sort of reanimated corpse god, um, was punctuated or defined by these moments of like celebration on our chat or whatever on our on our in our commentary, our Twitch, whatever, our PlayStation, our party speakers, where we're both celebrating and strategizing around getting kissed and then having like a pink butterfly fireworks celebration effect
Yeah.
um, to give him Scarlet Rot. I do think we may have actually beaten him on Valentine's Day or around Valentine's Day, which felt totally perfect.
Yeah, I mean, look, this kind of answers my original question about vulnerability and aesthetic experience. We made it such a stupid thing that there's no possible way. I mean, that's obviously I'm joking, but also we were joking the whole time
We
fighting.
were. And
Uh,
yet we weren't joking about the opening. Like, just mechanically, the
yeah,
fact
yeah,
that
yeah,
he
sure.
left such a huge opening that I would get like an actual visceral thrill when he went to kiss me. I'd be like, yes, like, please kiss me. Please kiss me. Because I knew that that was going to open you up to give him the butterfly virus.
Yeah. I think the correct
So
terminology was smooching, by the way.
smooching, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I was begging him to smooch me, like audibly on chat and or on mic,
Yeah.
and when he did, it was genuine cause for celebration. We would throw a party,
Yeah.
uh, and that was a quite effective strategy. I think you did manage to rot him in the winning run,
Yeah.
because
That's the thing.
he went for so many kisses.
Yeah, yeah, he got greedy and he had to pay the price. So maybe we made this game teach us a different lesson that was not intended at all, right?
Mm.
There's a real moral to the story, whereas I think if we played it just one on one and didn't have the same strategy, didn't have the opportunity of interactive cooperative gameplay, we maybe would not have learned our lesson in that way. Or
Exactly. I mean, there's two lessons. One was let him smooch you, which I think that we would say to each other. Um, uh, and then also, yes, like I remember I beat my head against the wall of this fight playing solo on two runs. And one of them, the first time I beat him, it took 8 hours, like straight trying for 8 hours, like from like 8 a.m. to whatever. I can't do math, 4 or something or 5. When I finally beat him on right before calling it for the day. And I remember that move being really annoying because if you dodge it, it's great, but it has weird timing and tracking, and it did inspire anxiety and fear when I was playing solo, but it was jubilation when we were playing
yeah.
co-op.
Well,
Um,
that's another. I mean, that another thing about that move too is that it never like I think I pretty much dodged it every single time, even though I knew that I was fine to get, smooched one time, right? Like it
Right, I
doesn't.
would actually scold you because I was like, "You're wasting an opening for me, so just
Yeah,
let
yeah,
me kiss you,
exactly.
dude, bro.
Yeah.
Let him smooch you."
So it's weird. It feels like, I mean, and on the one hand, it's undoing this kind of uh maybe thing that we have, like grab attacks, whether you're
Right.
playing, I don't know, Tekken or Mortal Kombat or whatever, or a game like this. Grab attacks always are kind of the ones that do pretty significant damage, but this is one that just does no, like essentially nothing, right? Unless it happens at least twice, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it is you're right that it's totally contrary to our initial expectations for how a grab attack should work. It is cheap like many Souls grab attacks, which
Right.
again can just track you out of nowhere and seem to have their own weird logic where even if you seem to be clear, you'll get snatched. Um, but you normally when you get grabbed, normally it's like, oh well that's it. I'm gonna get lose like 80% of my health if not die immediately. But this is a case where even if you're playing solo the first time, you're like, okay, like nothing happened. What's this rune above my head? Maybe that causes some anxiety if you're able to pay attention to it. But, I think the fact that you die so quickly anyway, I doubt. I'd be surprised if anybody the first time playing this fight were perturbed about that rune or even noticed it.
Yeah, I mean, I was curious, but um, as you probably know, I tend to like not really. It's kind of fun. I mean, this is making me reflect, I think, a little more on how I play these games, which is that, of course, we all have to like look stuff up online from time to time, to figure out where we're going or something. But there are still so many things about the game that I just like don't really pay attention to. So I still like, when I saw the rune, I was like, huh, that's interesting. And I think I never, one on my own, I never got the fail state. So I never, you know, smooch me once, shame on me, right? Or whatever, shame on you. So I never got, I never had to go through that fail state. But um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it is interesting, I guess, how so much of this is maybe a more general point. This doesn't really have to do with co-op, but so much of the gameplay is just totally imminent, like it's totally just kind of like instantaneous world building that just occurs, right? And you have to kind of, I mean, if you want to pause and I guess you can't literally pause the game, but stop and look something up or whatever. Otherwise, you have to just like kind of see what's going on, right? See what the effects are, or give it some kind of
Yeah.
time. Uh,
Yeah.
and I mean, I do think that that maybe is something that factors back in or brings it back to this question of the community that, whatever relationship or co-op playing together is the world building becomes different, right? I mean, I wouldn't let Radahn smooch me if you weren't there to watch it, right?
Well said. Well said. Uh,
No, but really, like, right, like the actions in the game actually do become different, and I think that maybe that's one way to also like go back to considering that question of vulnerability, right? Like you also make different choices in the game if you're not just being observed, but also, having to portion out the space you take up in the game, to give another player a certain function, maybe.
yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, maybe this is a good place to transition to more broader thoughts about the co-op run that we've been doing together.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Um,
I could start just with one thought that one thing that I really like about it, which we haven't talked about at all, but so much of the reward economy in Elden Ring and in all the Souls games is based around online play, which is funny for me to realize this only now. First of all, like there are certain items, like a lot of the offbeat weapons, you have these like weird, Elden Ring is full of these weird items, right? Craftable items that don't seem like they do that much damage and frankly suck for PvE when you're just playing solo. But weird timings, for like those glintstone things where you throw it down and then it shoots some glintstone pebbles on delay are
right.
actually really good for human opponents because you can mess with people's sense of when to dodge or block.
Right.
Um, or if you just have a weapon that nobody's seen before that has a really odd move set, even if it's not very powerful, you have the element of surprise or, keeping people off rhythm. And my point is not that I care much about PvE. I mean, I played a little bit and had fun invading and being invaded, but it does make more sense why certain items are gated behind, bosses, like seemingly unremarkable or underwhelming items, or show up as rare rewards for fights, for exploration, for going off the beaten track or finding really secret areas,
Yeah.
or for using your rare crafting materials. And even though I'm not using them, I do now that we're playing online, I do have the sense of like an entire other axis of interaction has opened up, not with other players, like that's a given, but actually with the game world. Um, it just seems like so much of what was purely inert or just completely useless, right? And seemed like it was bloat or wasting space in my inventory or wasting space, wasting design space, wasting space in the open world itself on the physical layout of the maps, like all those earthly flowers, like you collect them and it's like what the, and like now I realize that those are important, so that you can craft the finger calling remedies.
Right.
Um, it reminds me of playing Skyrim. And I don't know if you've done this before. I know you've played Elder Scrolls games before, but I played a ton of Elder Scrolls, especially when Oblivion, Morrowind were coming out, and Skyrim, sunk hundreds of hours into that in 2011 and
Okay.
2012. But I never once used alchemy, and when I got Skyrim remastered for the PS4 in like 2021 or something, I did a new playthrough. I played 90 hours or so, and I did use alchemy as an element of my build. And it suddenly just unlocked this, again, this whole other axis of interaction with the game world, right? Where suddenly like flowers and butterflies and all that crap that's just like floating around these exquisitely detailed worlds that Bethesda used to make becomes meaningful. It's not like I would necessarily use them, but like the fact that you can grab a little bit of fungus, off the ground, the fact that you can pick up a root, or pick flowers or catch a butterfly, that suddenly became meaningful and it charged the world with this like imminence, or interactive volatility and dynamism and fullness that it had formerly lacked. And that it was a very gratifying, like kind of wonderful experience actually of playing or replaying that game. And I am getting some of that in Elden Ring, where I am at the point with this game. I know I'm talking for a while here, but I am at the point with this game where I played it so many times that I get pretty bored just running around the open world. I know where my particular accessories or weapons generally are, and I know where the flask upgrades are, and those are exciting, but everything else feels just like filler or just like meaningless space. And now with this new online thing being the fact that we're playing online, that the world is full of intrigue again, in the way that I didn't even think was possible.
Yeah, agreed. And it's interesting how, I mean, what you named as this kind of imminent thing is something that was uh was still kind of already there from the beginning, and it just kind of comes into view depending on uh how you're playing the game. I mean, I
Right.
think something we already talked about a little bit off recording was I tend to be a very habitual player of these games. I usually, whether it's Dark Souls or Elden Ring, I pretty much always would just go for like a magic build. I like to shoot my magic missiles or whatever, sort of thing. Which I know is like a very safe, I think it's like one of the safer ways to play the game. You don't have to, you can be far away from enemies. You can kind of balance things out so that you can uh keep distance between yourself and enemies. Dodging, while important, is maybe not quite as urgent as it is if you're trying to get up close to them. However, playing the way we did also, like, for me, forced me, yeah, not only to obviously pay attention to crafting. In some cases we had to make the rot pots or whatever at first.
Yes.
We kind of abandoned that because that was getting, we ran out of them, or whatever happened. And the materials were difficult to get. But also, like, for me, forced me to really like think about builds, use spells I had never used before, right? Or incantations or whatever.
Mhm.
Um, we tried, and I guess this is partly, one of the things that I wanted to talk about that we're kind of getting to now, which is that we started by narrating kind of our parts of our final run through. Now we're talking about some of the stuff that we did in general, like the strategy that we kind of because we did have many different runs where, I think it was, I don't know, at least 50, 60, 70 runs easy, right? Like we had a lot of, some of them we kind of just died right away, some of them we got halfway, and then eventually we kind of uh pretty consistently, got the boss down to maybe like one third health or whatever before we got killed. Um, which means that we are doing this kind of backtracking or reverse engineering when we're thinking about what this experience was like to play the game, right? Because we're talking about, I mean, we're jumping in between, back and forth between, okay, my experience playing with you or whatever versus what my character was doing, right? Or like what we were trying to do in the actual game. Um, and so when we think about that in relation to how you know, like how we're going to talk about this game, uh, and like, what it means if we're going to actually close read the game or if we're going to give some kind of critical spin on it. It becomes, I think this is partly why it becomes more, I guess, kind of perplexing to talk about, right? It's not just like differently vulnerable. Maybe I'll say differently instead of less vulnerable, right? Because it is like certainly differently vulnerable. Like we both opened ourselves up to being smooched by Radahn, for example, the way that in the way that we weren't before, right? So that's one way. Um, so it's no longer, Stevens reading this sentimental romance in his office by himself in Remains of the Day, but it's the moment when Kenton barges in and he has to either declare that he's reading it or hide that he's reading it or whatever, right? Like the I don't know, maybe that's not the best way to put it, but I just mean that kind of experience of the singular, I guess, run through the game just becomes something totally different. And I guess I'm still trying to think through that. But partly what it is that we together witnessed all these different, and participated in all these different attempts that ultimately failed until we got the final one that succeeded, right? So we're kind of blending together a whole series of attempts that were all fun, right? Even when they failed, like it was intense, fun. We were trying a bunch of different things, and ultimately those things all kind of it's almost like a palimpsest or something, right? And the thing that eventually emerges is the defeated boss at the end.
Yeah, that's great. And I actually have a thought about Singularity and the online experience, but I did as just in your last bit as you were as you brought it back to Radahn, I did remember one more component of the Valentine's Day special package, which was not just the pink butterflies, not just the smooching or opening oneself to be smooched, but also the perfume that we were perfumes became for a moment an essential part of our strategy. So as we were celebrating being embraced, celebrating the shower of pink butterflies, we were also celebrating or strategizing about when to apply our best perfumes, which was very sweet, very romantic. So my thought about Singularity was just that, yes, like one thing that I talk about this a bit in the Bloodborne book, but Souls games are in a way famous for the repetition that they invoke, right? Just not just the repetition of trying a boss 70 times or 60 times,
Right.
but or replaying the game through New Game Plus, because they sort of traditionally dump you straight into the next cycle and you play through the game again, and you can play through as many times as you want with your character. But they also have a narrative sort of thematics of repetition, right? These cycles, all the games are about these cycles where the events of the game seem like they've maybe happened hundreds of times already, if not thousands, or just infinitely recurring.
Yeah.
Um, and of course, your character in each one has some reason why their death is diegetic, so that your dying to Radahn actually happened in the fiction of Elden Ring. Like my character, just purely on the diegetic level, died to Radahn 70 times, before they finally won.
Right.
It's not just the player who experiences the repetition, whereas the character, in the case of like The Last of Us or something, only experiences one life, one continuous life until they die, purely as the plot requires. Um, but one thing that's striking and totally unforeseen for me about the multiplayer experience, the co-op experience, is that the way we've been playing, especially recently, means that oh, sorry, I got ahead of myself. Despite this, the emphasis on and the proliferating levels of repetition in the Souls games, I actually think they're defined by singularity. But that these are games that have a kind of um, irrevocable nature and a sense of actual finality insofar as you can't manually save and load. So anything that you do that affects the game world permanently is actually permanent. And so many games just they've refused permanence, right? Because you can always undo things, you can always save scum or whatever, or just save and reload, or save at a decision point and know, like, okay, in the future I can always go back to this and try it again. Um, in Souls, if you do something, like if you accidentally kill a merchant, right? You're just never, you're out of luck. Like you killed the merchant. You can't go back. That file, that the merchant's dead in that file forever, at least until New Game Plus. And so that sense of permanence and singularity of the meaningful experiences in the character's life is really strong and pretty unique as far as big AAA action games goes. But in multiplayer, there actually is uh, it's not quite the same level of singularity insofar as, at least with bosses and running through areas, you do get to experience them twice in the same file. So the way we've been playing is like I'll help you out in whatever, Liurna Crystal Tunnel, and we'll beat the boss, and then you'll jump into my game and we'll do the same thing. We'll do the same dungeon, and we've been coordinating it so that we just did the Carrier Manor, right?
Yeah.
So I went through it in your game, and we beat the knight Loretta, who, I think that's the boss, and then immediately you jumped into my game and we did it again. And so technically, my character, my avatar, experienced that encounter twice, which is a totally unique thing. Like none of my previous, purely on the fictional level, like none of my previous Souls avatars have ever experienced a boss twice. Maybe in Dark Souls 2 you can revive them, but I never use those items. Um, and
Yeah.
it is an interesting deviation from like how I just conceptualize these games and how I've tended to experience them, Um, that instead of singularity, you have what's what's the two form of singularity? Duplicality? I don't know. Two-ness?
Yeah, I guess
Uh,
so. Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, but I'm blanking on the word if it exists. But that is a meaningful change, I think.
Yeah, it certainly is. I mean, I think that's like a pretty actually amazing point by you of there's all this repetition and yet it retains the singularity. It almost feels more like well, I guess a different thought. One thing just now that you're talking about doubling up in certain areas as we're doing the playthrough, that is, I do agree, like that is true, and yet because of a bunch of kind of invisible metrics that we're not seeing, I guess, but that we probably sense when we're playing, everyone's health is different, everybody has different limitations on them.
Right.
So it's not actually the same. It does still feel like a virtual reality within the game of what the game would be if we were playing it just on our own, right? Like it
You're
feels,
so right. It really does. Especially because I mean, it's a significant and yet minor variable. The fact that your flask count is halved, which I didn't realize happened until we started doing this. I always assumed that when I jumped into someone's game, I would just have my full build operational.
right.
That totally changes how you play the game. Like I even recently realized that I could equip a talisman when I co-op with you that restores HP on critical hits,
Hmm.
which I would never use in single player, but it's incredibly useful in multiplayer because I only have like three flasks, right now. We're fairly early in the game. And so being able to passively, or not passively, but constantly restore health in every combat encounter means that I get to save my flasks and I can stay in your world longer, right? Or have more flasks ready for the boss.
Yeah.
Um, and that's just I think I'm actually changing my build when I go into your world as opposed to when I'm the host, where I get my full suite of flasks and can use that slot for something more sort of constantly beneficial, like a stamina talisman or something, or the one that boosts your stamina equip load and health, something that gives a constant buff as opposed to this more situational item.
Yeah, and I'm sure that we both are the same, and maybe that most people who at least play it, uh, single player, not co-op, are the same. Where I always, for not just for this game, but for pretty much any game, I am always going to opt for the thing that gives me a constant buff, right?
Right.
So if there are if I'm leveling up, if I'm doing anything, it's usually I do not want the situational thing. I want the thing that's just going to like tack on extra whatever it is that I need to my
Yeah.
character. Right? And yeah, I mean, I do think that in that way, the game, you know, does have, I mean, the maybe the multiplayer is just a totally, I mean, obviously it is, but it is, we kind of get it emphasized to us by actually playing it multiplayer, is that it's a totally different dimension. It does feel like maybe some of the items are kind of created for multiplayer, right? Like it wouldn't really
Definitely.
make sense to use some of these things on a playthrough on your own, right? And maybe it wouldn't make sense to use certain spells or weapons or attacks on a playthrough on your own, right? So it's interesting. And I mean, I know that there's some kind of Elden Ring multiplayer game coming out, right? Whether it's a expansion or do you
Night
remember
Rain. Yeah, it's
that
a
thing?
standalone game. I think it's a lower price. It's like $40 or something. That's a roguelike or procedurally generated multiplayer combat game. I don't know that much about it. I think it's sort of like Fortnite, but Elden Ring. I could
Okay,
be
yeah.
wildly off base. But yeah, it's some kind of multiplayer centered game, which actually seems pretty fun. Like we could definitely give it a try, especially for the podcast. Even if it's just to kind of be like, this is really weird.
Yeah, no, I'd be down to try it. I mean, I just think it's interesting that now they're doing that, whereas before, the game as it stands is kind of holding together these totally different dimensions, right? Um, anyway, yeah.
Yeah, well, should we wrap there
Sure.
and
Yeah,
maybe put make a tentative plan for a Night Rain episode sometime down the line?
yeah, sure. That sounds good.
And we can follow up on some of these multiplayer thoughts too. I mean, it will be fascinating to see the game's world. I think it's like the same map or basically parts of the same map, just repurposed for this pure multiplayer arena combat mode.
Yeah.
Um, and what that does for, I mean, I think the game is connected to the lore of Elden Ring in some sense. I don't know, and again, I haven't read up on it, but I think that it will be. I mean, it'll be an interesting way to sort of modify or sort of revise some of these thoughts about multiplayer in Souls with a game devoted to it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's maybe a good place to end. I know there's obviously way more to say, but I'm sure we'll be returning to Elden Ring in many different ways as we keep, discussing these things. So,
Absolutely. All right, let's call it.
cool. Sounds good.